Hi class, this is Mr. Morris. This is video number 7 of the summer homework video answer key. Homework 1, this is question number 7. It asks us to perform the following mathematical operations, express each result to the correct number of significant figures. Now in the last video, if you had watched that with us, we mentioned that you always have to check, especially if you've got mixed operations. Like in this one, I've got multiplication and I have subtraction. We have to check and make sure that we're keeping track of our sig figs as we go. Another thing you have to watch out for in this is order of operations, or maybe you remember it as PEMDAS. Okay, so parentheses come first, and then you know the rest, hopefully. But really, the main ones we're going to see is parentheses, multiplication and division, addition and subtraction. Okay, so if the addition and subtraction is in parentheses, you've got to do that first. Otherwise, you save the addition and subtraction for later. Okay, let's get started with it. Okay, remember addition, subtraction, you're going to keep the least number of decimal places in your sig figs in your answer. With multiplication and division, you want to keep the least number of significant figures, not just decimal places. So let's look at this. Looking at significant decimal places or just significant figures. Okay. So first thing we need to do, because I see parentheses, and sometimes they're understood parentheses. We'll get to that in a little bit. But when I see parentheses, we are going to do that first. So I'm going to get a red pen, and we're going to do that before we even get started. So 25.27 minus 24.16. Now I understand you could put this all in your calculator and get an answer. That's great. We just want to make sure that we're maintaining our significant figures correctly. Okay, so I get 1.11. Okay, that's 3 significant figures. I want to keep the least number of significant figures as I go through this, right? Just double check and make sure we did that right. Yeah, okay. So we want to keep the least number of significant figures. I've got 4 here. Got 5 there, I've got 3 here, so I want to keep 3 significant figures in my answer. So let's do this. 4.184 times 100.62 times 1.11. When I get that number, I want 3 sig figs, so we're just going to keep the first 3 non-zeros, 4, 6, 7, and look at that number. It's not above 5. It's not 5 or above, it's below 5, so we're going to say 467. 467 is our answer. Okay, so just kind of a recap. I'm going to go through this first one a little more detailed, okay? I need to keep the least number of decimal places because we have a minus sign, or addition, it would be the same way. Once I get the answer to that, I'm multiplying. In those multiplications, we want to keep the least number of significant figures. So this is our answer based on our rounding rules for decimal places. Now I've got 3 sig figs times 5 sig figs times 4 sig figs. 3 sig figs is the least number of sig figs. Therefore, our answer, 467, needs to only have 3 significant figures. Let's do another one, and I won't ramble quite as long. Okay. With this one, if I were to put this in my calculator, those of you who are good with a calculator, hopefully you know this, I can't just type it in exactly the way it's written. I'm going to have to group something in parentheses. These are understood parentheses. I know it's not written in the problem this time, but it is understood that you need parentheses to group that together in the fraction. Because of that, that kind of enters into our order of operations. Remember, parentheses comes first. So we're going to start with that. 8.925 minus 8.9 0.904, I get 0.021. Now this is kind of interesting. 0.021, how many sig figs is that? That 0 doesn't count. It's your first non-zero and the numbers that follow it. So I just get 0.021. That's just 2 sig figs. Okay, let's write it up here. This becomes 0.021. That's 2 sig figs, right? And this is replacing what's in parentheses, 0.021. And then this is 4 sig figs. Over here we said that 100 is exact, so that's significant, that's important. It tells us that it has an infinite number of sig figs. So I don't need to worry about sig figs on this one. I'm going to round this to 2 significant figures. All right? So 0.021 divided by 8.925 times 100, and I get 0.235. That's a really small percent, but it is correct because I already multiplied by 100. So 0.235 rounds up to 0.24%. 0.24%. I may have lied. I may have rambled more than I meant to. Let's keep going. Looking at part C. I see parentheses again. We always start with the parentheses. And don't forget, addition and subtraction, we're going to keep the least number of decimal places. Let's put it in the calculator, then we'll round. 9.04 minus 8.23 plus 21.954 plus 81.0. I was doing this problem with some students the other day, and I fell into a trap that I know that some people do. When you see a bunch of plus signs, you just kind of forget to check each individual one, and it's really easy to mess it up if you're not paying attention to the signs, if you just kind of get in a hurry. So make sure that's a minus sign, this is a plus sign, and that's a plus sign. I see students do that all the time, so just watch out for it. I did it just yesterday. So, okay, 103.764. Let's look at our sig figs. Actually, I said sig figs. I should have said how many significant decimal places we have in the parentheses because we're adding. Okay, so I've got 2 decimal places, 2 decimal places, 3 decimal places, and here's 1 decimal place. Least number of decimals is 1. So I need to round this to 103.7, and then I've got that 6 afterwards, so that 7 becomes 8. 103.8. I acted like I was done with the problem. I'm not. 103.8. That's just what's in the parentheses. Now we need to divide by that number. 103.8 divided by 3.1416. Then you get this number. I need to round it to 4 significant figures or 2, 4, 5. We're going to round it to 4 significant figures because that's less. So 33.04. That next number is a 0, so it's just going to be 33.04. One quick thing about this. It would be totally acceptable if you wanted to do this. It would be totally acceptable to plug this in. So, I mean, I would still write this here just so that you can keep track of how many sig figs you've got. It has to be rounded to 4 sig figs because of the sig fig rules. But if you're like, I don't know, I want a more exact answer, it would be totally fine for you to put the exact number here in instead of the 103.8. So I could say 103.764 divided by 3.1416 and then round. Now wait a second, we get a different answer. I get 33.03 instead of 33.04. That's kind of the point of significant figures. That last number, the very last number, is an estimate. It might go up, 1 or 2 or something like that. So it's okay if your answer is slightly different. What's important is that you show the correct number of significant figures. This video is a little longer than some of the others. I'll try to move on a little faster with the last one. Okay. Again, we have an understood parentheses because I have an addition on bottom of a fraction. That's an understood parentheses. I have to have that. So let's do that calculation first. PIMDAS, parentheses comes first. 8.321 plus 4.026. Okay, I need to keep, that's 3 decimals, that's 3 decimals. Okay, we'll just keep 3 decimals. So it's 12.347. All right, I've got 5 significant figures down there. Up here I have 2 and 5. What's the least number of sig figs? 2 is. Okay, so it's not always going to be limited by what's in parentheses, but you always have to check it. Okay, so we're going to round this to 2 significant figures. 9.2 times 100.65. I just hit 2, 5. And then we're going to divide by 12.347. I need to round that to the correct number of significant figures, which we said was 2. So it's 74.996, so on. 2 significant figures would be 74. Because the next number is greater than 5, we're going to call it 75. All right, some of these are a little bit tricky. I hope that that was a helpful review of significant figures, and also just kind of to let you know, you need to follow PIMDAS, or order of operations, when you decide how to round. So follow that with not only your calculations, but also your significant figures rule.